Diplomatic row. We cross live now to Jack Parrock, who is in Brussels. Jack, good evening to you. This is, of course, the biggest united action by Western countries against Russia, really since the end of the Cold War. Why is it that it seems to, excuse the pun, to have touched such a nerve?
Well, what's happened essentially is that the Western powers, the European Union, well, at least 19 European Union countries, NATO, the United States, Canada, Australia have all stepped in and expelled certain diplomats. Now, what we've seen today is the NATO, the military alliance that's based here in Brussels, expel 7 diplomats. They've ended the process of 3 diplomats from being accredited to their organisation, and they've insisted that Russia's presence at NATO must be reduced from 30 down to 20. It's a significant move, and it's just part of this coordinated effort that this bloc is trying to show. It's a reaction to the Salisbury attack, this nerve agent that was used against a former Russian spy and his daughter in the British town of Salisbury. It's a collective response to that, but really this is about much more than this. This is about the allegations of tampering in foreign elections, especially in the United States, of hacking and cyber influencing on social media. And that's why this coordinated response has come against Russia. Russia obviously not very happy about what's happening.
Indeed, Moscow has called it a provocation, but as you say, because it's such a coordinated response, it is going to make it difficult for a retaliation. Do you think Putin might have overplayed his hand when it comes to this one?
Well, it's difficult to judge that. At the moment, really what's happening is there's only the expulsion of diplomats. So what the countries are saying is that they are pushing people out. They're not allowing Russian diplomats in their country that they believe might be used in intelligence gathering. Now, that's interesting as well in what the NATO Secretary General Jens Stoltenberg announced today. When he announced these new measures, one day after the main bulk of the European Union and the Americans, etc., announced their measures, he said that what this is for is to firstly show a strong sign to Russia that their actions will not be accepted, but also to prevent them from gathering intelligence, which is what many of the organisations like NATO and the European Union and the countries within those blocs are worried about. So really they're trying to show that show of strength, but also there is a reality that they need to continue to speak to the Russians. So the NATO Secretary General continued to say that they won't end what's known as the NATO-Russia Council, which is a meeting that happens on an ad hoc basis where they sit down with their Russian opposite numbers at NATO and discuss the issues at hand. Importantly, after the annexation of Crimea, when Russia annexed Crimea following the beginning of the Ukraine conflict, they did suspend the NATO-Russia Council for a period of time.
But we've also seen, of course, former Soviet satellites like the Czech Republic and Lithuania and indeed Ukraine itself are joining in the fray. Will that make Putin bristle a little?
It certainly could, but as far as the European Union nations go, this is quite interesting. The 9 countries that haven't expelled any diplomats. We've just seen Belgium, where the EU and NATO's based. They've just expelled 1 today, they're saying. Their original excuse was that they couldn't expel diplomats because they are home to NATO and the European Union, but after the NATO move, that was obviously an invalid argument. But the countries that haven't expelled are Hungary, which is known to be close to Russia. Greece, the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras considers himself a sort of bridge between Brussels and the Kremlin. Last week, when there was a summit of EU leaders, we understand that Alexis Tsipras took a phone call from Russian President Vladimir Putin himself. And also, in addition to that, a number of other Eastern Bloc countries, Slovenia and Slovakia, but also some of the smaller countries like Malta and Luxembourg that don't really have that much diplomatic weight when it comes to Russia.
If we take it to the UK now, this for many might seem as Theresa May's moment of statesmanship, the fact that she's been able to get this coordinated response from allies and friends of the UK.
Certainly, as far as the British Prime Minister goes, the expulsion of all these diplomats will be considered a major success. Initially, the reaction from the European Union was of simple support, and when that all happened originally, everyone thought, oh well, you know, European Union countries won't stand by them. And I think there was also an element of surprise when Donald Trump sent away 60 Russian diplomats and closed the Russian consular service in Seattle. I don't think that was a very expected move. Certainly, expelling diplomats, as I say, doesn't really do too much. It reduces the lines of communication. But if you're sat in Moscow, I suppose this does look like all of these countries and organisations, a big number of them, are trying to make a sign that they're not pleased with things like cyber attacks, with the nerve agent attack in Salisbury, etc., and all those kind of things.
And of course, we've just seen the re-election of Vladimir Putin in Russia. How is it all playing out in Moscow on the ground? Can Vladimir Putin keep on as using this as another sign of anti-Russian sentiment in the West that he must defend against?
Well, certainly that is what the Russian administration will do. They will continue to say that this is a sign of Western aggression towards Russia, that these countries are trying to isolate Russia. The president, Vladimir Putin, got elected by a huge margin, although there were accusations of sort of electoral abnormalities. But yeah, the Russian president, Vladimir Putin, will continue the line that he's often had to take when it comes to these sort of issues. Even pre the Ukraine crisis and the annexation of Crimea, there have always been tensions, especially between NATO and Russia. So I don't think the sort of relationship will change that much, although this is a significant thing. As far as the relations between Russia, the European countries and NATO, they haven't been good for a while.
And of course, all of this comes as we are just, weeks away from the global sporting showpiece. That's indeed the Soccer World Cup, which is set to take place in Russia in the coming summer. How is all of this going to complicate that, or will that be a side show, so to speak?
Well, this is one of the issues. If this diplomatic problem goes further, then you might see visas to Russia to go and see the FIFA World Cup for nationals of countries that are competing in it. People might struggle to get visas. People might be afraid to attend. You know, when diplomatic issues like this come, if they hear that if Russia expels their diplomats in response, they might be concerned that they might not get the consular service that they would like. We'll have to wait and see in the summer when that World Cup takes place. I think it could be a real serious moment in the history of Russia's place in the world. Russia has been so keen to hold this World Cup and has been so proud that it achieved to get it. And I fear that it could these diplomatic concerns could overshadow the whole tournament.
That's indeed our Jack Parrock there on the line from Brussels, giving us a picture of what's going on around the expulsion of over 100 Russian diplomats from the EU and other NATO allies.
Well, as the expelling of those Russian diplomats from European countries, it continues to dominate international news. Let's take a look at the reaction on social media, as well as some of the other big stories of the day. British Prime Minister